Novak Djokovic has been handed a US Open draw that could decide far more than just whether he wins another trophy. Not just the title, not just the rankings, not just the legacy argument that follows him everywhere now. I'm talking about whether the greatest problem solver in tennis can still solve the one problem age eventually gives every legend, a draw with no soft landing. Because this time, the path is different. Djokovic arrives in New York chasing Grand Slam number 25. Still one of the smartest and most dangerous players in the sport, but no longer protected by inevitability. He is the number 4 seed. He is defending points. He is walking into a men's draw that suddenly looks wide open after Jannik Sinner's withdrawal, and somehow that does not make his job easier. It makes it stranger. It makes it more volatile. It makes every round feel like a trap. And that is why this draw matters more than people think. Because when the bracket opens up for everybody, it does not just create opportunity, it creates chaos. So let me ask the obvious question. Did Novak Djokovic just get a gift at the US Open? Or did he get the one thing even a 24-time major champion does not want, a tournament where too many people believe they can beat him? Because that is the real story here. On paper, the headline sounds favorable. Djokovic has secured a top 4 seed. That means he avoids the very top names until later. He is not staring down an instant collision in round 1 with a seeded monster. He is not walking straight into the hottest favorite on opening day. And with Jannik Sinner out, one giant obstacle is gone before the event even begins. https://www.usopen.org/DLC6.open008 and 21-Novak-Djokovic-2 25th Major Opens as Sinner misses 2026 US Open. HTL. But tournaments are not won on paper. They are won in rhythm, in stamina, in recovery, in how much a player has to spend before the second week even starts. And that is where this gets dangerous for Djokovic. Because the worst possible draw for Novak in 2026 is not necessarily one loaded with the biggest names from round 1. The worst draw is one that forces him to solve different problems every 48 hours. A big server one round, a fearless young hitter the next, a grinder after that. Then a top seed who believes the old king is finally human. That is the killer part of this draw. Not just the names, the sequence. Fans see Djokovic and assume one thing. If he's healthy, he can beat anybody. And historically, that is a fair assumption. But the US Open is not just another tournament for him now. It is pressure layered on pressure. The chase for number 25 has become its own shadow. Every major now gets framed as history. Every draw becomes a referendum. Every tight set becomes evidence for one side of the argument or the other. Either, he's still Novak Djokovic, he always finds a way. Or, this is the slam where the door finally closes. That tension is why this story hits. Because the men's field around him is no longer built on fear alone. It is built on opportunity. Players are not just entering this event wondering how to survive Novak Djokovic anymore. They are entering wondering whether this is finally the bracket where Novak has to survive them. And when that belief spreads through a locker room, everything changes. This is the part casual fans usually miss. When a draw loses one dominant favorite, people automatically say the remaining top players got lucky. And yes, on one level, that is true. Jannik Sinner's withdrawal absolutely changes the math. A major contender is gone. One proven championship-level obstacle disappears from the board. https://www.usopen.org/DAN US Open US Open. /UW Tollers ask.D Djokovic's path to 25th Major Opens as Sinner misses 2026 US Open. HTL. But open draws can be brutal. Why? Because closed draws are predictable. Open draws are unstable. In a closed draw, you know who the 1 or 2 monsters are, and you build toward them. In an open draw, suddenly the danger spreads. A dangerous floater can catch fire. A young hitter can play freely. A seed returning from bad form can suddenly rediscover himself for 7 matches. A quarter that looked manageable can explode in 3 days. That is the trap Djokovic may be dealing with here. He is not just chasing opponents. He is chasing control. And if there is one thing Djokovic has built his greatness on, it is control. Control of tempo, control of patterns, control of pressure, control of a match's emotional center. A messy tournament takes some of that away. Now yes, being the number 4 seed matters. A lot. That top 4 position means Djokovic avoids certain collisions deep into the tournament. It gives him a cleaner structural route than if he had fallen lower. That alone is massive, especially at this stage of his career, when conserving energy is not a luxury. It is part of the strategy. https://www.forbes.com/Bruce Lee/2026/08/23 How Novak Djokovic, the Wolf and Winter could win the 2026 US Open. But here's the catch. A better seed does not erase the burden of expectation, it magnifies it. Because once the bracket opens and fans see the path, the conversation changes immediately from, can he compete, to, he has to capitalize. That is a different kind of pressure. If Djokovic loses to the eventual champion in a brutal semifinal, people will still say the chance was there. If he gets dragged into too many long matches early, people will say the draw took a toll. If he survives but looks shaky, people will say the title odds are an illusion. There is almost no emotionally neutral version of this tournament for him. And that is what makes the story clickable. It is not just, Djokovic has a tough draw. It is, Djokovic has a draw that will be judged harshly no matter what happens. There is another layer here that most casual audiences ignore until the scoreboard forces them to care. Ranking points. Djokovic is defending 800 US Open points, which means this tournament is not only about legacy, it is also about maintaining position in a field that is younger, deeper, and increasingly less patient. https://www.atptour.com/players-novak-djokovic-d6.3/rankings-breakdown. Now, 800 points is not a footnote. That is serious pressure, because if he does not go deep, he is not merely failing to add to history, he is giving ground. And for a player at this stage, ranking position matters, because ranking position shapes future draws. Draws shape future energy demands. Future energy demands shape how many real title windows are left. So when people say, it's just one slam, no. For Djokovic, it is never just one slam anymore. Every major now talks to the next one. Every point talks to the next bracket. Every result changes the geometry of the season, which means this US Open draw is not isolated. It is connected to the entire closing chapter of his career. And yet, here is the reason you should not rush to bury him. We have seen this movie before. Every time the sport gets a little too excited about the next generation, every time people start talking about Djokovic like he is a fading threat rather than a live one, he does something deeply annoying for everyone trying to move on. He problem solves. He shortens points when needed. He drags matches into ugly mental territory. He exposes nerves. He turns youthful aggression into impatience. He makes big hitters hit one extra ball, then one more after that. And suddenly the match they thought would be explosive becomes claustrophobic. That is still his gift. So yes, this draw looks dangerous. But dangerous for whom? Because younger players do not just have to hit through Novak Djokovic. They have to endure the feeling of playing him at the US Open, with all the scoreboard pressure, all the history, all the momentum swings, all the weird emotional gravity that arrives when you know you are not just playing a man, you are playing a legacy. A lot of players say they're ready for that. Far fewer actually are. The phrase I keep coming back to is this: roadblocks, not walls. A wall is obvious. A roadblock slows you down, forces a detour, drains your fuel. And that is exactly what this draw threatens to do to Djokovic. He may not face the absolute nightmare matchup immediately. He may not get the worst possible quarter on paper. He may not even face the most dangerous name until late. But if the bracket keeps asking different tactical questions, that can be just as punishing. Can he handle the early pace? Can he avoid long physical matches? Can he keep the serve efficient enough to protect the legs? Can he stop younger players from turning rallies into track meets? Can he enter week 2 without already looking spent? That is the tournament inside the tournament. Because for older champions, majors are not only about whether they can reach their top level. They are about whether the draw allows them to arrive there before too much damage is done. And then, of course, there is the bigger landscape. Carlos Alcaraz is back in the picture. Alexander Zverev is looming. The field is not short on players who can convince themselves this is their moment. Even without Sinner, there is no shortage of ambition in this draw. In fact, Sinner being out may have made the rest of the contenders even more dangerous, because now belief spreads faster. Hell, Kames usOpen.org.html/2006.0821.Novak.Djokovic-to 25th That matters, because belief is half the battle against Djokovic. For years, too many players lost before the match even began. They respected the name too much. They panicked when the first two sets got tight. They treated a lead over Djokovic like a fragile secret instead of a scoreboard fact. The newer generation has less of that fear. Not none, but less. And if Djokovic sees one of those players late, after spending more energy than expected in the earlier rounds, that is where the killer draw narrative becomes very real. Not because the bracket looked impossible on day 1, because it became exhausting by day 8. So what is the real question here? It is not whether Novak Djokovic can still win the US Open. Of course he can. The real question is whether he can win this US Open in the specific way his body, ranking situation, and legacy chase require. Efficiently, calmly, without leaks, without giving away too much physical or emotional energy before the final weekend. That is the standard now. A younger contender can survive chaos and call it momentum. Djokovic at 39 cannot afford chaos the same way. For him, chaos has a cost. And if this draw keeps billing him every round, eventually somebody else may cash in. So here is my verdict. This draw is not impossible for Novak Djokovic. It is worse than that. It is deceptive. It gives just enough hope for everyone to expect a title run, while still containing the exact kind of instability that can break a campaign without warning. That is why I think this is such a strong story. Because if Djokovic comes through it, the win means more. It tells you the survival instincts are still elite, the problem-solving still works, and the 25th major dream is still alive in the most serious way. But if he falls, nobody is going to frame it as just another loss. They are going to say, this was the opening. The draw was there. Sinner was out. The seeding was favorable enough. And the chance slipped. That is the weight sitting on this tournament. Not just the bracket itself, the meaning attached to it. And maybe that is the perfect place for Novak Djokovic to be. Because throughout his career, he has done some of his best work when the story around him starts splitting in two. Half the tennis world convinced he is still the most dangerous mind in the draw. The other half convinced time is finally collecting the debt. That is where we are now. A wide-open US Open. A number 4 seed with 800 points to defend. A record 25th major on the line. A field full of younger players smelling opportunity. And a bracket that may look manageable from far away, but gets more uncomfortable the closer you stand to it. https://www.atptour.com/o players-novak-djokovic-d643/rankings-breakdown https://2026 direct Novak.Djokovic Part 2 25th Major Opens-HTL. So now it comes down to this. Is this Djokovic's roadblock? Or is this another chapter in the long history of people mistaking difficulty for defeat when Novak Djokovic is still on the other side of the net? We are about to find out. If you want full round-by-round coverage of Djokovic's path, the biggest danger spots in the draw, and whether this killer bracket becomes a championship run or a collapse story, subscribe now, because this is one of those tournaments where every match could change the meaning of the entire draw.